Secretary, very good to have you. The idea is that we're going to up the sanctions or get even tougher, maybe with China itself. What do you think of that?
Well, I think we need to put more pressure on the Chinese, and they need to recognize it's in their own self-interest to put more pressure on North Korea. I think in the end, this has to be a diplomatic solution in which the Chinese are fully engaged, Neil, and recognize that their own long-term security lies in steps to demilitarize and denuclearize North Korea.
Let's say they know that, because they're not idiots, but they can't control this guy. What about that possibility?
Well, are they doing the best they can? All we can ask of them is the best they can to leverage their position, their authority, their influence. And I doubt that they've fully exploited all the influence they have on the situation.
So would you slap rough sanctions on the Chinese themselves? In other words, we're obviously going after anyone who does business now with North Korea or trades with them. Now we're extending that potentially with the Chinese. Now, obviously, that risks a trade war, but the administration seems more inclined to risk that. What do you think of that?
You got to deal with the relative risks, and the risk of a nuclear North Korea unanchored to the well-being of the rest of the world is truly a menace and just cannot be allowed to go on. I think we can avoid a trade war with the Chinese because they're going to understand this isn't about trade. This is about bringing leverage on a rogue nation that needs to be reined in.
But I wonder whether they are getting that message. And again, you're more astute at this than I. But I see the Chinese thinking that eventually, you know, we huff and puff, but we're not going to go much further than that. That we're, you know, offended by what the North Koreans continue to do. But we're not going to risk a trade war to exact more concessions. Do you think we should let the Chinese know on that they are wrong?
I think we have to get the Chinese into a mindset where they recognize that the options that we have are not good for them. Anti-nuke missiles stationed all across the Southeast Asia.
Right.
The possible nuclearization of South Korea, of Japan, and ultimately, Neil, and this is the ultimate one, of Taiwan.
Oh, sure. No, you're absolutely right about that. And by the way, the growing fear that the Japanese have had it and might get back to militarizing again because they just have no confidence that, you know, China's going to control it. That would be a nightmare to China. Is it your sense, though, that this cat and mouse game that we've been playing, you know, like in the UN just a few days ago, sir, we slapped wider sanctions on, and yet at the last minute, I'm told the Chinese and the Russians de-toothed some of them. In other words, that they were not as rough as they could have been.
Well, the Chinese, the Russians, they're all hoping that there's a way to escape this without escalating.
Right.
I think we got to show them that there's not going to be an easy out on this one. They're going to have to invest in the solution. And I think nobody better than this president to make that point. You know,
right.
A skilled negotiator. He's a skilled strategist. He's, I think, got a strategic mind capable of sizing up the other side and what leverage points he has with them. This is the right time for President Trump to be in that office.
If you don't mind my switching gears, Secretary, on the whole tax cut thing, we're told we might get details in the next week to 2 weeks, maybe not on the 25th. That was the earlier date. It's potentially being pushed back. We're told there are great differences between the House and Senate packages. We're told as well the administration, actually President Trump has made it very clear, does not want to make these across the board, that the rich, for example, won't be getting a tax cut or most likely won't. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's Neil, it's vitally important that we get tax reform done. We've had 8 years of stagnant growth and stagnant incomes. We've had a president committed to 3% growth versus the 1.5 to 2 that we've seen, and we have an American public that's demanding action. I think it's absolutely critical that the Congress and the president deliver on their
but
commitment.
Do you get that kind of growth, sir, if the rich are left out of it? Say what you will about the rich and all, they do account for most of the taxes raised. If they're not getting a tax cut, would you get as much oomph out of it?
Well, what's tax policy all about? It's the marriage of good economics and good politics, and you got to bring them both together. I think the focus on middle class prosperity has got to be the centerpiece of the reforms, and at the same time, we have to make sure that we remove the burdens from the job creators. And who are the job creators? Well, entrepreneurs, small business. So certainly we've got to make sure that small business, entrepreneurs, the job creators have the burdens of this tax code, which is miserably burdensome on them, lessened. So sure, we've got to make sure that they get lower marginal tax rates.
All right. Finally, there's been some frustration within the Republican Party that this president has gone over their heads and reached out to Democrats to get support. The president saying he really was compelled to do that because they let him down on health care and other matters. So he is negotiating with Democrats increasingly. How do you feel about that?
Well, Neil, after 8 years of gridlock in D.C., I think there's something refreshing about a president trying to break the gridlock and reach out and looking to shake things up and cut across the aisle, go across the aisle.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? Things haven't been working the way with what we've seen the last 8 years. Let's try something new. I think the president's to be commended for it.
I was wondering, and we're getting a 2-minute warning from this presser coming on. Secretary, one thing that's been raised among Republicans is, and by extension, maybe it could be DACA, it could be this with the president talking to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, that he will settle for a tax cut in this case that won't be as big or won't be as stimulative because it will miss some features to get that Democratic support. It'll be better than what we have, but it won't be the real bang for the buck. That's a fear. Do you share that?
No, I don't. Again, I go back to the fact that the president is a skilled negotiator and a skilled strategist.
All right, sir. Thank you very, very much.